This next little bit, we're going to discuss things. We're going to be super sensitive, both to the situations here in the room and situations out there, because we're going to talk about things that are a little hard for listeners to process. Why do bad things happen to good people? Um, Less specifically, first of all, it rains on the just and the unjust. So life is life, right? Um, Life is going to happen. Um, the positive side of this, and people have heard me say it over and over again, is everything in life is an opportunity for growth, whether it's cancer or winning $1 million. In God's eyes, they're all opportunities for us to grow and to follow in Him and to lean into Him. Whether it's climbing to the mountain or the valley, everything should lead us back to Him and who He is. Now, with that being said, there's different options. Life's going to happen. People get sick, people die, things change, accidents happen, everything happens. But we also make choices. People do reap what they sow, because that's very biblical. And so, in this specific instance that we're going to talk about and get into, is a situation where a pastor misuses their authority and who they are to sexually abuse and rape women in the church. And because I know that this is an ongoing situation and all the players are still being fleshed out and everything's being worked out as far as behind the scenes, we do need to talk to that level of trauma. And since we have it in the room and we have different things going on, I can speak to that in the sense of I do not know that personal pastor in that ministry, but I do know those involved in it. And I know that's what you were referring to when why does bad things happen to good people? Because for that situation, that person was in a church ministry prior that had leadership that had perversion in their lives and that had a familiar spirit to sexual assault and to abuse of young women. And knowing that you and others went through that and were influenced and had those people in your life speaking to you was a way the enemy used to groom you to be familiar with that spirit, and that spirit not alarm you right away or disarm you because of the power difference and things like this. Where in that church, you may not have been the one that was in that position, that discretion happened. You do know the people personally, you do know all that happened. And then here you are married, whisked away to another part of the country altogether, and in a situation where you were also in kind of a complementary where the roles were very strong men and you listened and you were subservient and the women didn't have much of a voice and things like this, and they bring in someone new, big, strong, whatever, and groomed you and groomed other things and took advantage. And I know this is something that we're still working through, this trauma, and we're going to continue to work through this until we're finished. And I know, people in your life are aware of what's going on, some of them. Um, what I say to you is, why does it happen to bad people? And I know you want to ask the question of, you have an issue of shame. Why didn't I say no? Why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I do that? Well, I do know that there are things you did to try and put a voice to what was happening. And you feel like it wasn't enough, right? Even to the point that your husband didn't know about it. You hid it in shame. You hid what was going on. Why? Because part of when you were young and coming up, being around that spirit, that familiar spirit, when you came up here, you still thought you had to honor that. And so when it took advantage of you and when it raped you and when it took your innocence and when it did that, even though you were a wife and a mother, you didn't have no because you disassociated. You didn't have no because you were in a place where you were subservient. You didn't have your no because you literally, to this day, can't remember. You have huge voids in your memory of what happened because you were in survival. And because you had seen it before, you're mad at yourself now for not nipping it in the bud then. And I know we've discussed it. We know there's more probably in the woodwork. There has to be. This isn't the first. This isn't the last. Um, by patterns and things we know of the situation, this was a well-oiled machine that has happened and been moved around with this pastor and what's happened. And how far this goes in exposure, we'll know in the future. We'll see what God does with this. And I promise you to walk that out and get to the bottom of it as far as you want to go. But as far as your wholeness and your shame in that, you need to understand that not having a voice in the moment was literally your survival. And I'm amazed that you were able to keep it secret for as long as you were. You pushed it so far down and hid it so far away that I know you look back now in your children's lives and your husband's life and say, how could it have been different if I had been free? If I had not felt this burden that I carried alone, you carried it alone. Not one person knew other than you and the perpetrator knew what happened to you over and over and over again. And you carried that because you're strong and because you're a leader. You see it as weakness. I see it as strength. Any other woman would have imploded. But you carried it, and it was a Christian leader, and you still came out and went to church with your husband and went to church with your children. And it wasn't until you got gobsmacked with the prophetic and the situation that you confronted the glory of God that you had to just unload all that in your life. And the truth had to come out, and transparency had to come out. And I know you're in an accountability group now of people that love you, that you can say what you feel and do what you feel as it comes up. And nobody's pushing you into freedom, and nobody's pushing you. They're allowing you to walk through that trauma each step of the time. And even your husband in his grace, the Lord's given him grace to step back and allow you those opportunities. And he's been wonderful. And I know it's frustrating too, because he wants to help you. The leader in you doesn't want his help. You want to figure it out, and you're feisty, and you're going to do it because you're strong, and you will. But one of the reasons we talked about specifically having these conversations is there's so many women with this story. And we're hearing about these women from all these major ministries, but it was happening 30 and 40 years ago. What the church needs to hear is it's still happening. And we specifically know in one denomination, multiple times all over the country where it's happening. And they just keep pushing it under the rug, or they keep moving people aside. And you've asked me the deconstruction thing. Well, for you, it's not even just deconstruction. You need to heal. It's how do you take a woman and put her back into a situation where that was where her abuse came. That's where her hurt came. That's where she felt no covering. And to be fair, I mean, your husband didn't know, so he didn't have an opportunity to defend you. He didn't have an opportunity to do all that. And I know his frustration, looking back, was he didn't get to be that man. He didn't get to be your defender. But he's taking it in stride. He's learning, too, to now stand strong and be there. And that's also frustrating to you because you're strong. But it's going to be every day that weakness. Every day of just giving it over to God, not allowing the shame, not allowing the guilt of I should have done more, I should have said more. You were a young mom. You were in ministry. You were on a team. You were part of the group. So not only were you a member of that church, not only was it a pastor and authority over you, not only was he WWE size and you a tiny little thing, not only was it against your will, you were groomed from childhood that was okay by what you had been around. And so there's questions in you of how do I go against authority when they can overpower me, they're a spiritual leader, all this other stuff. It's hard. It's hard to look back and being a strong woman, not feel defeated and not feel like you could have done more. But doing what you're doing now is more. Doing what you're doing now, surviving that, is even greater than you confronting it in the moment. The fact that you were able to keep that, keep it, now, honestly, if I had been around, I'd have snuffed it out of you. But keeping that, able to carry that, and then now confronting it, running to your giant. And I know those of us around you that love you, every time we see you pull back a little, we push you just a little farther each time to hit that giant and to go after it. That's not the term some of us use, but we are facing that giant every day. And every day you're going to be stronger. And I know that you've made choices to step back into leadership slowly behind the scenes. And you're putting yourself out there again to support leadership and to support ministry because it looks different, because it sounds different, because it's transparent, because it's authentic, and because it loves you and it wants to see you whole. And that's what we need to do with the kingdom And that's what we need to do with the church, is we need to now present a gospel, and we need to present a leadership that is safe, that is transparent, that can acknowledge their own sin, humble themselves, walk in the fear of the Lord, and promote those around them. Competition needs to be over. Hierarchy needs to be over. Superman mentality needs to be over. Idol worship of the man on the platform needs to be over. For us to move forward in this kingdom, we literally are going to have to go into a place of transparency. And that terrifies leaders, because there's a lot of skeletons in the closet. There's a lot more that we don't know about that's going to come out, because we're human and humans make mistakes. But up till now, we've had whole denominations that have just slid stuff under the rugs, that have just gone through stuff, and we know it. I mean, we know personally stuff that hasn't been exposed, that hasn't been called out yet, that hasn't happened. And how God does that's up to him. But what we do know is we know enough survivors to know there's a lot out there, and there's a lot going on. And my goal is to give you a platform to say, it's okay. You shouldn't feel shame. Let go of the guilt. You were, and you know it now because we've given you language for that. That's why you have memory gaps, because you literally separated that little soul left. And so we've gone back. We're going back to do that soul work to get you to where your maturity is and your strength is now. Because that's one thing I wouldn't put up as that firebrand, is if we're in a situation and you identify that, you're going to be the first to call it out. Although I'm pretty good at that one. But you're going to be the first to fight it and be willing to stand alongside whatever woman you see as vulnerable. And that makes you safe and makes you a safe place for other women. And that's what we need right now, is a leadership that is safe. And your experience and the trauma you face and your healing that's coming out of that will not only set an image for women to look for, his image of healing, but it's going to literally set a path forward for generations to say no, to hear your story, recognize it when it's starting to happen, and have the strength to say no from the beginning. So you're going to empower them in a different way because of your transparency and truth now. So I say, why do bad things happen to good people? Because sin's in the world. Because humans can be evil. And because we've fallen, and sometimes we make those bad choices, but sometimes those bad choices are made for us. And what we choose then is our reaction, our responses, and our healing. Those are the things we can control. And by doing all those, you just smack the devil in the face. You literally give him the 1-2 and be like, hell no, you can't stop me. And that's the biggest thing you can do with your life right now, is look the devil slam in the face and say, you tried your best. You came at me with everything you have. It's not going to work. And then we're going to tear down the gates of hell. And we're going to do it one woman at a time.